Hey guys, today we are going to talk about um, a couple of sections in Night by Elie Wiesel. First of all, we are going to start by covering blah, 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 blah. Hey guys, I really need you to be quiet. All right, hey guys, we are going to cover section 5 and section 6 of Elie Wiesel's Night. Um, First of all, section 5, which is, if you're following along in the actual book, which is page 47 through 65, I did not assign that to my particular class for reading it, but I do want to give you an overview of what is in that chapter, or that section rather. As the section begins, Elie, or Eleazar, as he refers to him, his younger self in this book, and his father are selected for slave labor. And so they are moved again, this time to Buna Monowitz, which is like a satellite camp of Auschwitz, which is owned by a German industrial firm. So Elie and his father endure humiliation, as is normal for, and I say normal, obviously that's not normal, but as it was normal for concentration camps, and random violence at the hands mainly of the German officers, but there's also people called kapos, which were the prisoners assigned to assist in the running of the camp. So if you think about our modern prison system, they have trustees sometimes who are prisoners, who are inmates who have good behavior, and therefore they're given extra responsibilities. Well, in this situation, those were the capos. But unfortunately, if you were chosen to be a capo, you also had to adhere to certain things, such as administering random violence, to be on the good side and stay on the good side of the German officers. So anyway, Eleazar's father really is finding it harder and harder to keep up. Remember, he is old. He is obviously weaker than Elie. And Elie is feeling a mixture of feelings, of emotions: anger, love, pity, all of these things that are not really easily defined. If you imagine yourself being in that situation, you might feel love from the camaraderie of other people who are in the concentration camp, but also obviously extreme anger. But he's also starting to feel those feelings, not just towards people, random people on the outside, or people who he's suffering from, but he's starting to feel those feelings towards his father as well. And that kind of creates a complex situation for him later on. The prisoners are obviously struggling with hunger, and Elie even says that he is becoming nothing more than a starved stomach. There's a public hanging in this section, but interestingly enough, even though it does trouble him briefly, he and the other men watching that public hanging really say that they are too hungry to think about really the ramifications of that, what that actually means. They are simply focused on their dinner because they have been deprived of that basic human right. In addition to that public hanging, there's also a child and 2 adult prisoners who are hanged for hiding weapons. And the other prisoners are forced to watch that. It's obviously an environment of really huge extremes that Elie and his father and the other prisoners are just simply trying to stay alive. And, this section really is very powerful when it comes to just an emotional response from Elie and trying to reconcile all of his feelings, and really not being able to process feelings, because when you are not given safety of just your physical being, how can you really focus on your mental and emotional state? So Ellie's not really able to process anything that's going on right at that moment. So the next section, I definitely want you to be able to pause this right now and go ahead and read the next section, which would be pages 66 through 84, and then come back and listen to my overview of that. Okay, so by now you should have read pages 66 through 84 in Night, and let's chat a little bit about what has happened in that section. In the previous section of Night, we ended it with the inmates' really anguished cry at the hanging of a young boy, and we see that the cry of, "For God's sake, where is God?" So questioning God amid this struggle to survive becomes the central theme of this section of the memoir, as Elie and the other prisoners are really asking whether they can, or even if they should, maintain their faith and rituals despite their suffering. So this is really interesting. In our class, we have also read some of The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom, and we know that she and her sister really at least claimed to hold on to their Christian faith, and that was the only thing that got them through this camp. We see a really stark contrast here. Elie is not clinging to God in this moment. He instead is questioning, how could God let this happen? Where is he? So on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, the prisoners improvise religious service, and Eleazar does attend, even though he feels like an outsider and maybe an imposter because he's begun to question God. Just excuse me for a second, my throat is killing me. Okay, so if you remember at the beginning of night, Elie's childhood really heavily revolved around the existence, the studying, the worship, the praying to God. But his questioning is really signaling a drastic transformation of his identity. A few days later, he and his father and the others in the camp actually debate on whether to fast on Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. It's the Day of Atonement. So here they are being starved to death and wondering if God needs their fasting in order to observe this holy day. And that's a very interesting question. If you want to think about it from their point of view, they believe that fasting is necessary. However, they are being forced essentially into starvation already. And how does that reconcile everything with their faith? So not longer after Yom Kippur, another selection is announced. And selection is obviously not a great thing. This time, Elie's father is chosen. So he prepares for the end by, this is, just a really touching section. He gives his son his inheritance, a knife and a spoon. And I want you to think about that for a second. From someone, all he has to give his son to remember to pass on to future generations is a knife and a spoon. Elie spends the entire day just obviously in dreadful fear that his father has been taken away and will have been killed. But however, when he returns that night, his father is still there. Somehow he has made it through that final selection. And those who did not are probably forgotten, seemingly forgotten. Elie goes into a section where he talks about how the prisoners are receiving more blows than food. So they're being beaten more than they're being given food. So this is, again, just as in the previous section, we saw how they must have been feeling emotions, but not even had time to think about them at all. Not once, because of just being treated so inhumanely. So by January, Eleazar is in the camp infirmary with an infected foot. And he learns that the Soviet Red Army is approaching and the camp will be evacuated. So can you imagine the joy, maybe the hope, or maybe the doubt that starts to rise up in him? For the first time in months, Elie and his father have to make a choice. They can leave with the others that the camp are evacuating the camp, or they can stay. They do decide to leave, and they march with the other prisoners through the icy countryside in the dead of winter to yet another unknown camp. And so this section ends, and we're kind of left thinking, I wonder if that is the correct decision for them to make, or does it even matter? So that's pretty much that section. Let's look back on a few of the passages. On Rosh Hashanah, Elie says, "My eyes had opened and I was alone, terribly alone in a world without God, without man, without love or mercy. I was nothing but ashes now." So here Eleazar is at a religious service, attended by 10,000 men, including his own father, but he feels alone. Let I think that that is totally a normal feeling, because I think sometimes when our faith wavers, do we not feel alone? And that is possibly the worst feeling that we could have. And perhaps the greatest gift that God gives us is the feeling, the ability to not be alone, if we can accept that He truly is with us. But it is something that we have to accept. We can't just feel it because He is here. He is with everyone. But it's something that we have to be able to feel by using our brains to accept that as well, which is obviously for someone in such a situation as Elie, something that he was struggling with deeply, deeply. Let's also look at another quote. At the infirmary, another patient tells Eleazar, "I have more faith in Hitler than in anyone else. He alone has kept his promises, all his promises to the Jewish people." That's a somewhat of a shocking statement here, saying that someone who has been suffering at the hand of Hitler, saying that he has faith in Hitler. But if you think about it, people who are in a situation where they are constantly, let's take it out of the concentration camp. Let's think about our current life. Do you know people who are constantly victims of something or another, whether it's robbery or get fired from a job, or their car breaks down, and they seem to just have that bad luck always following them? The one thing that those people can always count on is misery, right? And so this is being said on a much, much larger scale, to where this patient is saying that he has faith in Hitler because is actually doing what he says he's going to do. Evil is going to be there. Evil will never fail, is what he's saying. And that can be easy for us to fall into as well. It's definitely understandable that they thought that while they were in the concentration camp, because what they were seeing in front of them was evil. They were not seeing good. But it's important to remember that in the end, the ultimate end, looking at it from a biblical, spiritual Christian standpoint, in the ultimate end, after death, the good will be overtake evil. But that's hard to see, especially when one is suffering. And I don't blame them at all for that. So let's see. We are going to continue on with night later, but in the meantime, for my students, I have printed out a copy of Faith After the Holocaust. And this talks about a Jewish theologian and a Holocaust survivor who was born in Siget, just like Elie Wiesel was. He was also deported to Auschwitz, but he has definitely a different take on faith during the Holocaust. So I want you to read that and then answer some questions that are on your lesson plans that will evaluate the differences in how Elie Wiesel and David Weiss Halivna, I think is how you say his name, Halivna maybe perhaps, but how they, compare and contrast how they handled their faith during and after the Holocaust. So that is your assignment, and I hope that you take these things that we have read and really consider how who we are is not determined by our circumstances, but our circumstances do become a part of us. Our identity is shaped and reshaped by the circumstances we encounter, and our tragedy and trauma can definitely influence our individual identities as well as our choices, and perhaps the most important, it can influence our faith.